Right, we got one early bird, two early birds. Hey, everybody. Ah, there we go. Now here's
Many
everybody.
early birds. All right.
Hey, everyone, let me get this Facebook streaming started. I have a nightmare that someday I'm going to stream to the wrong group and like start streaming the webinar to my neighborhood community or something.
They'll get some nice language documentation content.
Yeah. Hey, Portlanders, you need to know about language documentation too.
All right. Hello, Allison. All right, so I think it's 7:01. I'll go ahead and introduce myself. So introduce myself in the webinar. So welcome to the fourth workshop hosted by the LDTC and ELP on language documentation. Today, we're going to be talking about morphology and syntax. So how words can be combined, how words can be created through morphology, and how they can be combined through syntax. My name is Samir Alam. I am currently a lecturer at the California State University, Los Angeles, here in LA. And I'm going to be talking about morphology and syntax. Just to lay out some ground, not rules, but like recommendations. So as I go, there's many different slides about both morphology and syntax that we're going to be going through. There's a wide range of topics, so you may feel overwhelmed or have questions. So at the beginning or at the end of each slide, I'll be asking the audience for any questions that you might have. So if you have any short questions about clarification, about the contents of a slide, or something you didn't understand, please do ask them either in the chat box or raise your hand. I don't know if actually how raising your hand works, but feel free to ask them at the end of each slide. If you do have a more involved question that you think may take a little longer to answer, please do hold on to that. Note that question down and ask it at the end of each unit of either morphology and syntax, and I'll try to address it in a at the end of each unit. So yes, hello. Looks like we've got people signing in from all across the world. Love to see it. Love to see this multilingual exchange. All right, so without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started to talk about morphology. All right, so here, what is morphology? So morphology, as shown in this cute little comic about cacti, is the way that we combine words, right? So here we have this comic showing about how in English, we have a singular form for the word cactus and the plural form for cactus, which is cacti, right? So in both there's two cacti here, one cactus and another cactus, and there are two cacti. And then we're seeing that we have one noun, cactus, that has two forms. It has a singular form, cactus, and cacti for the plural form, right? So here we have a process where we're combining different morphemes, different units of meaning to form one word. And that is, we're having different meanings associated with the word. So all languages have some sort of morphology where you create bigger words from smaller morphemes. And the process of describing how languages do this is what we're going to be going over today. So because the language of the webinar is English, we're going to be using English as our example for talking about morphology, but we're only going to be talking about a very limited set of morphological rules, right? So we're going to be talking about English as our case study just to get us started to think about how do we approach morphology as a whole. And of course, as we're thinking about many different languages, there's going to be some morphology that we're not going to be covering in here. There's going to be a lot of morphology that's not going to be covered in this presentation. We're just trying to get started to think about the very, very basics using English as a case study. So that's what we're talking about today. Morphology, the study of word formation, and doing the very basics. any questions about the agenda for morphology today before I jump into talking about it? Hello, everyone. Again, seeing more international, or I guess we're all international, so seeing people from all across the world. All right, so without any other questions, so we're going to jump into talking about morphology. So again, as I already discussed a bit, morphology is the study of words and word structure. So how we can form words from smaller units of meaning. So our first question that morphology asks is, what is a word and what makes something a word? So this might seem very trivial on one hand. We can think of, like, let's say we're talking about in English. In English, the way we typically define a word is when we're looking at written language, we can see anything that is set apart by a space, right? So in this first sentence, where we see this, the study of words and word structure, each of those units of sound that's separated by a space is what we can think of as an English word, right? And so we have different processes that we have for combining morphemes and creating English words, but other languages form words differently. So other languages might have different things that they consider words. Many languages do not write spaces when they write languages, and many languages aren't even written in the first place. So there's not always a straightforward way for thinking about how we form words, and it varies from language to language. As we're looking at words are a very crucial part of describing a language. So it's important to think about how we form different words so we can describe how the language makes words. All right, any questions on morphology thus far and how it's difficult to describe, or how it's different to describe what a word is from language to language? All right. So again, like I talked about, as we discussed on the previous slide, a word is a piece of language. It's but again, how small pieces we can make of a language varies from language to language. So written words can help us determine what is a word. But again, all languages are written pretty differently. So some languages have different writing conventions. Some languages might have words spaced out like in English. And some languages might not have any spaces in between their words, right? So they might just write a sentence without putting any space. And beyond that, some languages aren't even written at all. So we can't only rely on the written language to determine what a word is. A better way to, or a more effective way to think about what a word is to look at the parts of a word. So words are divided into parts called morphemes. All right, so some words can be one morpheme and some words can be made up of other morphemes. And just to cover all our bases, a morpheme is a small unit of sound that has some sort of meaning attached to it. So to kind of illustrate that, we're going to be talking about different types of morphemes. So different parts of words that can have meaning attached to them. So there's two main categories of morphemes that we're going to be talking about today. We have bases, which are the smallest part of a word that can carry basic meaning, and an affix, which is something that can be added to the base to change meaning or add grammatical information, right? So both a base and an affix, these are two types of morphemes that we have, but they both carry some meaning attached to them. And that's what makes them a morpheme, right? So a base has a very basic meaning. Oftentimes these will be like, we can think about base words. So in like cat, dog, run, sit, these are nouns and verbs, and they all have meaning attached to them. And they're the smallest that we can, and they have some very core meaning to them, right? So a cat is like a feline animal with a nose and whiskers. And a dog is a canine animal that barks and jumps. And sitting is the action we do that I'm doing right now in a chair. And these are all very basic core units of core units of meaning. Affixes, on the other hand, are pieces of pieces of words that can't stand on their own, but they can, and they don't have any meaning on their own, but they can change the meaning of a word, right? So here we have prefixes and affixes, so words that are affixes that are added at the beginning and end of a word. And to illustrate what a prefix and an affix is, and how an affix is, and how it can change the meaning of a base word, we can think about plurals, for example. So in English, as we talked about at the very beginning of this presentation, we have singular forms of nouns that indicate that there's just one of something. So let's say cat is a singular noun. When I say cat, a cat, the cat, one cat, this form cat only indicates that there's only one cat. Whereas if I say cats with a C-A-T-S, that S at the end is an affix. It's added to the base word cat to create a new type of a change in the meaning, right? So cats, when I have C-A-T-S, that indicates that it is a plural noun. There is more than one cat. So cat on its own, it's a base. Cat and cats together, that is a plural noun. That means that there is more than one cat. I've added a plural suffix, the S, cats, and that indicates that there's more. I've changed the meaning of the word cat. So cat on its own is a base. It has a very basic meaning that I can easily identify. S, on the other hand, the S that I add to cats, it cannot stand on its own and needs to be added to a noun to change the meaning of the noun, right? So both cat and the S are morphemes. They both have some meaning attached to them, but cat can stand on its own. It's a base, whereas on the other hand, S is a suffix and it has some meaning, but we can't identify it without attaching it to a base. So that was a little abstract. So let me know if we have any questions about what a morpheme is, what a base is, and what an affix is. And I'm going to look at the chat right now. And yes, thanks, Ronnie. Yeah, that's a good illustration that in some languages around the world, in English, we have sentences that are comprised of separate words. Every English sentence is typically going to have more than one word, but in other languages, different morphemes can combine to create a word that would be translated as an English sentence, right? So in that case, you can form what look like words that are a lot more complex and have a lot more morphemes combined to them than we do in English. So each language has their own way of forming words, and it's important to keep that in mind when we're describing a language. So thank you for sharing. And is that Tesfaye? Correct me if I'm saying that wrong. I think this is not only about the science of morphology. How can we document words, morphemes, other characteristics of words? Is there any new development of latest software for documenting words? So I'm not, I guess if this is a question about technology for analyzing words, I'm not super familiar with any technology that will take any language in the world and break up a word. So break up a word in different morphemes. So there are, for like English and like major well-documented and well-studied languages, there may be some tools that can help us break apart words into morphemes. But especially for endangered languages, which is the subject of our work here, oftentimes there's very little documentation and understanding of endangered languages or under-resourced languages. And so it requires work on somebody who is analyzing the language or describing the language to analyze the words and break them up into morphemes. There is, however, software that you can use to keep track of different morphemes. and to break up, to apply your own morphological analysis to a language, right? So as far as I'm aware, for many endangered languages or under-resourced languages, there isn't technology to do the analysis for you, so to speak, but there are tools that can be used to help your analysis. All right. And so some of the ones that I'm familiar, actually the one that I'm most familiar with is Flex. I'll put that in the chat. And then there's also Elan. And we can talk about those later if you have specific questions at the end of the webinar. All right, for Robert, do affixes always stand alone, or are they always paired together to create one meaning, like a prefix and a suffix being required to create the one meaning? Okay, I would. I'm not sure. I'm gonna post that in the chat because I'm not sure whether everybody can fix this. So this is from Robert Medley. All right, so affixes are always paired together to create one meaning. So that's what makes an affix. That's what makes an affix separate from a base, is that an affix is a piece of sound or a piece of language that cannot stand on its own. So let's say if I take the word cat plus s, cat can stand on its own and it's a base and it has a very basic meaning that we can identify. The s at the end of cats is an affix because it cannot stand on its own. So it's an affix. It changes the meaning of the word cat. It makes it so that there's more than one. And it cannot, but it can't stand on its own, right? I can't just say on its own in English and have it mean something. I need to attach that to a noun. So if I take other words, I can take dog plus s, horse plus s. These different words, cat, dog, and horse, are all bases that can stand on their own. They have very basic meaning. And the s at the end is an affix that changes the meaning of cat, dog, and horse to a plural meaning. So affix can stand on its own, and suffix cannot. An affix cannot stand on its own, while a base can. Beyond what we have here as prefixes and suffixes, these are just two types of affixes that we find in English. There's other ways of adding small parts of meaning to change the overall meaning of a word. In other languages, we have some things called circumfixes, which go before and after a word, and infixes, which show up in the middle of the word. So I don't have any examples off the top of my head, but we can discuss if you have more questions about different types of affixes at the end of the units. Hello, Maria. All right, I'm going to move on to the next slide. All right, so here we have 3 English words that all have more than one morpheme. Not only do they have more than one morpheme, but each of these English words has a base and one or more affixes. So unhappy, lovable, uncomfortable. Each of these words has a base and more than one affix. And so anybody have any ideas about what the base is? If you have any ideas about what the base and the affixes might be in these words, go ahead and put those in the chat. So in unhappy, which is the base and which is the prefix, which is the affix, in lovable, which is the base and which is the affix, and in uncomfortable, what is the base and the affix? Hello to all our people joining. Never too late to join and participate in this webinar. All right, so Harian, I think if I'm saying that correctly, happy says happy is the base and un is the affix. That's correct, right? So in unhappy, we have one base that is happy, and that is a basic core unit of meaning. It's an emotion where people feel good. And un on its own doesn't mean anything, but it changes the meaning of happy. Dr. Hassan says happy, comfort, love. Yes, those are all bases in the words, right? So in love, lovable, love on its own has a meaning, and we can change kind of the meaning of love by adding the suffix able, the affix able, that changes it into an adjective. Same thing in comfort able. So comfort we can think of as a base, and and able, which we have from our previous two words, are the different affixes. So here we have separated unhappy, loveable, uncomfortable. The portions of the word, the morphemes in black are the bases, and the morphemes in red are our affixes. We have one prefix for un, and we have one suffix, which is able. All right, great job, everybody. Thank you for participating. All right, I have, there was one question about infixes. Anna, if you want to put anything about infixes in the chat, feel free to do so. Or if anyone else knows anything about infixes, feel free to do so. Otherwise, I'll get to that at the end of this unit. All right, so for different types of more affixes that we have, right? So we've broken up morphemes into bases and affixes. And we've broken out affixes based on their position. So prefixes coming before a base and affixes coming after a base. Now we're also going to talk about different types of affixes based on their function. So there are two kinds of affixes that have different kinds of functions. We have derivational affixes and we have inflectional affixes. So derivational affixes change the meaning of a word, and they can change the category. So if we think about the previous example, if we take unhappy, happy is our base and un is an affix. But what kind of affix is un? Well, un drastically changes the meaning of happy, of the adjective it's attached to, right? So when I say happy, it means something when I'm feeling good. Unhappy means something where I'm feeling bad. So, or I'm not feeling happy. I'm feeling the opposite of happy. So when I change the semantic content, that means I change the meaning. I change the meaning basically completely. So un then is an affix, and it's a derivational affix because it changed the meaning. Similarly, for lovable, we have love, which is our base, and we have able, which is our affix. But what kind of affix is able? Well, we know it's a suffix because it's after the adjective, but it's also a derivational affix because love on its own is a noun. Able, when I add love, when I make the word loveable, then it becomes an adjective. So I've changed the category from noun to adjective. So here for this definition, if you're not familiar with the term semantic content, syntactic category, we can think about this as derivational affixes change the meaning. So semantic context means meaning, and syntactic category is just part of speech or type of word. So nouns, adverbs, adjectives, verbs, these are all different categories. So affixes that change the meaning or change the part of speech are derivation. Inflectional morphemes, inflectional affixes are affixes that add grammatical information that is not very drastic, and they may vary based on the context of speech. They may change the context of an utterance, but they don't drastically change the meaning like unhappy. They will just change, they'll have the same core meaning, but maybe just change something a little bit. So if you're familiar with the terms tense, aspect, mood, gender, number, those are different morphemes that can change affix. Those are different concepts that are indicated by inflectional affixes. But one, to make it more concrete, if you're not familiar with those terms, is we can think about the plural morpheme that we just went over, right? So we have cat and we have a plural morpheme s, and that s is an affix and it's a suffix because it's at the end of a word. But is it derivational or inflectional? Well, cat and cats mean very similar things, right? We're talking in both cases, we're talking about a feline animal, but we're just talking about the amount of feline animals we have. So if I say one cat, we're going to have one furry creature And if I have two cats, we are going to have two furry creatures. The meaning is almost the same. It's just a very slight change in the context that we would use it in. So inflectional affixes add grammatical information, they add some change in meaning, but it's not very drastic. Whereas derivational morphemes have a very big change in meaning. But yes, if you're familiar with the technical terms, test aspect, mood, gender, number, these morphemes that indicate any of these are typically inflectional morphemes. All right, thank you, Anna, for the infix example. Any questions on how to distinguish derivational and inflectional affixes? All right, so here we have another set of words with more than one morpheme attached. So all of these words have a base and suffixes attached to them that are derivational or inflectional. And in some cases, we might even have both derivational and inflectional. So go ahead, look at these words, find the affixes, and try to determine whether the affix is inflectional or whether it's derivational. Thank you, Anna. So any guesses that you might have, or maybe not guesses, any answers that you might have, feel free to put them in the chat. Don't worry about them being correct or incorrect. We're here to practice.
Yeah, let's maybe start with the most straightforward one. What do y'all think reads? What is that S on reads doing?
All right, we are from both categories. Yes, yeah. So we have some suffixes here that are inflectional, and we do have some that are derivational. But we have both inflectional. Reader is derivational. Yes, so reader here is derivational. We have our base word read and the suffix but we want to be careful here that reader, the whole word isn't going to be derivational. It's going to be the affix. So the suffix on reader is derivational because it changes the verb, which is read, into a noun, which is reader, right? So read is, you can say I read, he read, he reads, she reads. But when I say a reader, I can't say I reader, you reader, she reader. Reader is a noun. So the reader reads, we've changed the part of speech significantly. And we've created a noun. So that is a derivational suffix. Okay, Maria says the S in reads is inflectional. Yes, that's also correct. So again, in reads, we have a base and a suffix. Read is our base, it's a verb. S is our suffix. So read and reads are both verbs. So if I can say I read, but he reads, it reads, she reads. It's a verb in both of these cases, and the meaning has not changed very significantly between I read and he reads and she reads. The action being done is the same. We just changed a little information about who's doing the reading. So the S on verbs in English indicates that it's a third person subject, he, she, it, that is doing the reading, that is performing the action, but it does not change the meaning drastically. All right, so yeah, those are both two great responses. Here we have the rest of the suffixes broken down. So brightly and brightness are derivational. Yes, thank you, Nadia. And we have brightened, where we have derivational and inflectional. Readable, that's the same able suffix that we saw earlier, that's derivational. And reading is inflectional. So any questions on why any of these words is inflectional or derivational, or does anyone have any different answers from what's up here? All right, let's move on to talking about different types of affixes. So sometimes affixes look the same, but have different functions. So what this means here is that, hold on. The one affix can look like it's the same, like it has the same spelling, but its actual function can be different, right? So if we think about writer, if we're looking at E and R between 1, 2, and 3, we have write and we have R, of compose R, hunt R, play R. We have a verb and we have a suffix that's coming after it, which is represented by R or ER, depending on the word, in writing at least. And that seems to be doing the same thing in one, and for all the words in one, right? So we have writer, write, and writer. So a writer is someone who writes, a composer is someone who composes, a hunter is someone who hunts, and a player is somebody who plays. So R here seems to be making write, making a noun, meaning that it's somebody who does something. For 2, we have R coming at R and E coming at the beginning of a word in a prefix form, right? So we have produce and we have reproduce, store, restore, gain, regain, load, reload. In this case, we have an R and an E again, but it's doing something completely different. So the RE is attaching to a verb, but it's not making a noun in this case. Reproduce doesn't mean somebody who produces. In fact, it's still a verb, and it means it has a different function. So reproduce means to produce again. Restore means to make something be there again, right? So to store it again in a sense. Gain, regain is to gain again, and load, reload means to load again. So we have an R and an E. Once again, the form is very similar to the affix that we saw in 1, but it has a completely different use. So reproduce, the RE and in 1 and 2 has a different meaning and a different function. In 3, we have E and R again at the end of the word, similar to 1. It looks like a suffix, easier, cheaper, slower. But we'll notice that the E and the R here, once again, has a different function. So the ER here is attaching not to a verb, but it's attaching to adjectives. So easy, cheap, slow, these are all adjectives and not verbs. So when we attach, not only is the base that we're attaching it to different from 1 and 2, but it also has a different meaning. So when I say easier, it means more easy. When I say cheaper, it means more cheap, and slower means more slow. In this case, it's not indicating somebody who is easy. It's not indicating someone or something that is cheap. And it's not indicating someone or something that is slow. It's changing how much of an adjective something is, right? So 1, we have an ER that means a person or a thing that does something. In 2, we have RE that means to do something again. And in 3, we have an ER that means more of an adjective. So when we're looking at morphemes, we want to be clear. We want to not only pay attention to what does the morpheme look and sound like, but we also want to look at what the exact function is, right? So even though we can have morphemes that look very similar or identical to each other, we can still distinguish them based on function, on what they actually do. So as we're documenting a language, we want to make sure that all the morphemes that we're describing, we're paying attention to the work that they actually do. Any questions on how one morpheme that looks the same can have different functions? Hello. All right. So for our next slide here, we're talking about why does it have 2 meanings? So from Tara. So why does a word have 2 meanings? So in this case, in this example that we're looking here, we're seeing that these are all English words. So we have write, composer, hunter, player, easier, cheaper, slower. These are all words that we would use in English. Through some accident of history or for what one, there's no real reason that these words have two different meanings, right? So there's no reason that there's no like principled reason that means a person who does something in one, but it means in more of an adjective in three. It's just the way English language works, right? So we can look at historical linguistics and we can look at older English to see about why one set of sounds may actually be two different morphemes and with two different functions. But as we're describing it in person, as we're describing it real time, sometimes we don't have an answer for that, right? And that'll be the case for many languages across the as we document them or try to describe them. Sometimes we have access to what that language sounded like before, and we can try and reason about why one affix may have what looks like one affix may have different meanings. But sometimes we won't be able to do that, right? And we'll just have to be conscious about how we're using the language. So yeah, good question. Thank you. All right, so here we have a similar instance of similar sounding morphemes that have different meaning. So in one, desks, cars, benches, we have an S or ES at the end of the word that at the end of a noun that indicates plural. Whereas in two, we have an S or ES at the end of a verb that indicates a third person subject. So again, we have more. I'm sorry, I didn't give everybody a chance to respond to this, but this is just another example of how we have one similar sounding suffix that has different, that can have completely different meanings. In one, we have a plural as plural suffix that makes a noun plural. In two, we have a third person present suffix that indicates that the subject of a sentence or the subject of the verb is a third person subject. So same looks very similar, pronounced the same, but they're completely different meaning. Also noticing here, as we're looking at affixes, some affixes are going to sound slightly different depending on which base they attach to. So in desks, the S has a very, it's a very hissing noun sound. When I say cars, that S at the end is actually pronounced more like a Z, right? So it's cars, it sounds like a buzzing. Whereas benches, there's actually, or benches, as some people might say, there's actually a vowel here, right? So I have desks, cars, and benches. So the same morpheme can have different pronunciations. For technical terms, this is called an allomorph. If you're interested in learning more about that, we can talk after. Same thing in speaks, swims, and washes. The morpheme here is doing the same work. All the morphemes in two, all the suffixes in two are doing the same work, but they're pronounced differently based on the base. So morpheme isn't always going to look the same every time. Yes, yeah. So every language does have some confusing rules, and that's why it's important to document them. So thank you everybody for your input. I think our last slide about morphology. So some other words, there's some other ways to form words that are not just about combining bases and affixes, but we can do it in other ways. So compounding is the formation of new words by joining words. So for example, after, if I take the base, after, and noon, these are both bases that have pretty concrete meanings. So after can be used as its own word. After I go to bed, after I wake up, and noon is a time of day. I can combine these two. Words to make a new word, afternoon. So beyond combining bases and affixes, we can also combine bases and bases, and that is called compounding. So same thing, bedroom. Bed is a thing that you sleep on. Room is a section of a house. Bedroom, or two bases, you combine them and it becomes a new word, bedroom, which is a compound. Reduplication is the formation of new words by repeating parts or all of the stems. So we can, without going into the detail of what a stem is, we can see this example from Tagalog where we have the word bili. Again, I'm not a Tagalog speaker. Apologies if I mispronounce this. which means by, and when you say bibili, you're taking part of the word by and pronouncing it again. So you're repeating it, and it has a new meaning that means will buy. In English, and actually in very colloquial English, maybe I don't know if this is just an American feature. I'm an US English speaker myself. We also have some sort of reduplication that changes the meaning. So if I say in English, you can say I'm studying, just to mean I'm doing the action of studying. If I say I'm studying, that means with a little emphasis on the first word, on the first time I say studying, that means that I'm really studying. I'm doing real studying as opposed to fake studying. So English, you can also, many languages across the world do reduplication, some more than others. Thanks, Tara, for showing other languages. Yeah, some languages do tons and tons of reduplication. Some do very little or not at all. So that's another form. In that case, we're taking a base or a part of a base and creating a different we're repeating it to have a difference in meaning. Alternation is the formation of new words by changing the inside. So here in English, we have foot and feet. Foot is a singular foot, the thing at the end of your leg, and feet is plural, so you have more than one foot. Here, unlike the normal plural suffix that we have in English, we don't say foots with the plural suffix. We don't actually have any suffixes here or any affixes here, right? Because there's nothing before or after foot that is changing foot that changes it into feet. It's just part of and there's nothing that's going inside either, right? So we're not saying where there's nothing new being added. It's just something that's already there that's being changed, right? So foot, the vowel of foot is changed to feet. The sound changes to the e sound, and that makes it plural. So that's another form of morphology. So that's what we have covered for some very, very basic concepts of morphology. Again, mainly focusing on English, English examples. We've talked about bases. We've talked about different types of morphemes. We have bases, which are core units of meaning, affixes, which attach before, after, or inside a word, which change the meaning of a base. And we've talked about different types of affixes that have different functions. So we have derivational affixes, which change the meaning significantly or change the part of speech. And we also have inflectional affixes, which only change the meaning very slightly. We also have different processes for creating new words that are not limited to base and affix combinations. We have compounding, reduplication, and alternation. I've gotten a bunch of great input on the examples that we've provided and examples from other languages that are always very interesting and informative to have in the chat or have in our discussion. So thanks everybody for contributing to this. Do keep in mind that as we think about morphology of languages that are not English or even within English, there are going to be more concepts in morphology that go beyond what we've covered here. But in summary, all words can be broken down into one or more affixes, one or more morphemes, and these morphemes are going to create bigger meanings. How we do that is going to vary language by language. So thanks for everybody for everything, and thanks Anna for talking about Hawaiian. Any questions about morphology and how we build morphemes? How we use morphemes to make words? Thanks. Oh, thank Manipuri. Yeah, that's yeah, reduplication is very common across the world. So thanks for sharing. All right. So if there's no further questions about about Manipuri or about morphology, now we're going to briefly thank you, Dr. Hassan. We're going to talk a little bit about syntax. So syntax, we've just talked in morphology about how to combine morphemes to create words. Now we're going to talk about how to combine words to create sentences. And thanks everybody for introducing also where your languages are spoken and all that. It's we're all learning about each other's languages, and that's why it's great to be in this space. So please continue to do so and keep doing so, because I really appreciate it, and I hope you all appreciate learning about each other's languages. So syntax is, again, how to combine. We've learned how to combine morphemes to make words. Now we're going to talk about how to combine words. We're not going to talk about how to combine words. We're going to talk about describing how words combine, right? So there's not just one way to combine words to make a sentence. And we're going to be talking about how to describe how words combine naturally in languages, right? So like every language is a different way of combining words to make sentences. And we're going to be talking about how to describe those combinations, and that's syntax. So syntax, combinations of words, the rules of combinations are syntactic rules. Oh, and that's what it says here, right? So syntax, the studies of phrases and sentences and their structures. If we're not sure with what a phrase is, because people will use it differently, we can think about it as just how do we combine words? So to think about how we combine words, we have to think about what kinds of words we're combining, right? Because when we learn a language or when we know a language, we don't only know how to combine individual words. So let's say I know 6 words of English, or like a couple words of English, and I say, I know the cat eats fish, right? And I know these 4 words, right? As I learn the language, I'm not going to be learning how to combine the and cat and the and fish and the cat eats fish. I'm going to be learning how to combine types of words or categories of words. And these categories, we can call them as parts of speech. So I can learn that cat is a noun, fish is a noun, and nouns have different relationships to verbs, right? So if I want to use eat, I have to have a noun that's a subject and a noun that's an object. And if I have a singular noun, I'm going to need an article, which is the. So, right, I can say the cat eats fish. And then if I learn another noun, let's say I learn dog, I can substitute, knowing the syntactic rules of English, and I can say, well, I want my subject of the verb eat to be another noun. I want it to be a dog, and that dog is a noun. And so I can say the dog eats fish. So in order to learn the syntactic rules or the rules of combinations of words, we need to learn about the parts of speech that each word can be. So every language is also going to have different types of parts of speech. Some languages have more categories than others, or some may use them differently. But all languages are at least thought to have nouns and verbs. So any questions up to now about what syntax is, what we're covering in this mini unit? And just as an aside, it looks like I'm running a little bit late on time. So if anyone needs to go at 8 p.m. or what's 8 p.m. for me here in Pacific time zone, or at the end of the hour, feel free to do so, but I'll just be trying to cover everything without rushing through it. So I'll try and be timely, but if you need to go, thanks again for your coming. All right, so nouns are identifiable entities, people or objects. We can think about them as things. In English, we often learn a noun as a person, place, or a thing. Abstract nouns, we can also have things that are not that are not like visible. So like running isn't like a specific thing. There's not one running that we can point to. Or if I say idea, sentence, paragraph, ideology, these things are not necessarily going to have a physical form, but they're an entity. So that's why we can refer to them as nouns. Nouns, if we some indications of nouns is that in languages with determiners, they can occur with determiners. So like in English, we have the, this, that, those, a cat, the dogs, this house, that lamp, those dogs. At the, this, that, and those are all articles or determiners. And the thing that comes after it is a noun. And one of the rules of syntax, English syntax, is that singular nouns always have articles or determiners coming before them, and then they're always going before a noun, right? So we can see here, we can say the dog, those houses, a linguist. These determiners are all occurring before nouns. And the examples on the bottom, that is flying, a shiny, that flown. The star indicates that those aren't what we normally consider grammatical sentences in English. They don't sound like natural, at least standard American English, which is what I'm speaking right now. And so the reason that it is because these determiners are not coming before nouns, right? So one of the key features of a noun in English is that the noun they occur with determiners before them. Some languages have determiners that come after them. In Romanian, for example, there's a determiner that comes after the noun. I believe that's also the case in Zapotec, which is spoken in southern Mexico in Oaxaca. So determiners may come before or after a noun, and some languages have different determiners or may have very different determiners. So in Mandarin Chinese, for example, there's no determiner for and the. And so where a language may have its determiners and what the determiners actually are is something that's going to change from language to language. Any question on what a noun is or how to identify them, at least in English? I'm checking there. All right, so our next main category here is verbs. So verbs denote events, processes, and states. We can think about that as an action. And they often occur with things like tense and aspect. So verb, we can think about that as something that happens or that's something that somebody does. What verbs actually describe in a language is going to vary from language to language. Some languages have a lot of verbs to describe things that might be nouns or adjectives in other languages, but I think all languages have verbs as part of their category. What languages do with those verbs, beyond what words can be verbs in a language, what also differs from language to language is what languages do with those verbs, right? So in English, we have tense and aspect that we indicate on our verbs. Tense indicates whether an action occurred in the past, present, or future, or non-past. For example, if I say walks, I walk to the store, he walks to the store. Those are in the present tense. I'm talking about them as they're happening habitually. I can also say I walked to the store, he walked to the store. That ed suffix at the end indicates that something happened before the time that I'm talking. Aspect is a little bit of a more abstract concept, at least for me to think about, but we can think about whether an action is habitual, ongoing, or completed. So in English, the helper verb, let's say we can talk about I am walking. So that I am walking, I was walking, those are all continuous actions. I have walked, I had walked, talk about the action has been completed, right? So in tense talks more about when the action was. So was it before now? Is it happening now? Is it going to happen in the future? Aspects indicates whether the action is like ongoing or completed. So these are kind of technical definitions, but they both kind of indicate that how languages can describe the time of an action and whether or not it's been finished, right? So the duration, time, talking about the nature of the completion of the action. So some languages have many different tenses from English. Some have different aspects. Some languages, like Manipuri, thank you for this, are said to be tenseless but have aspect instead. So some languages may have tense, some languages may not have tense, some languages may have aspect, some languages may not have aspect, and even languages that have tense and aspect are going to differ in which tenses and which aspects they use. So that's just something to keep in mind as we're describing a language, is that verbs can have different ways in which they're described in terms of time. All right, and thanks. And yes, if you have any, English has very few tenses, or has one, maybe not few, but has a set of tenses and aspects. But the way that they're described is going to be different in language from language. So please, if you have anything cool or interesting that you feel or you like about a certain language that you want to share in the chat. We're very happy to see that. Other parts of speech that we can think about are adjectives. So those are usually to describe nouns. So like the red dog, the big car. Red and big are describing the different nouns. In some languages, however, adjectives are just a type of verb. So in some languages, for to say the red dog, you would say the dog that's redding, or the dog that is red. And is red is on its own a type of verb. So not all languages are going to have adjectives as a distinct category. Prepositions are provide information about nouns, verbs, and location. So this kind of abstract, you can think about, they describe relationships, places, in English, we have in, at, near, by. Oftentimes they typically appear with nouns. So in the car, at the school, near the house, by the river. This is describing a noun, but describe and can be used in various parts of a sentence. One thing to note, again, is that prepositions will be different from language to language. Some languages have prepositions that come before the noun. In the house, some languages have postpositions that come after a word. So like in Bangla or Bengali, which I speak, I would say, to literally translate in the house, you would say house, the, in. So the in can come, the direction of the place of the preposition or can be at the end, which makes it a postposition. So yes, Punjabi has both tensive aspect and postpositions. Yeah, so some languages are going to have postpositions instead of prepositions. I'm not sure if some languages might have both pre and postpositions, but I think it's typically one or the other. And adverbs provide information about the verbs. They basically describe how a verb is done, right? So in English, I would say I walk slowly, I walk quickly. Slowly and quickly are describing the way, the action of walking. Could I, from Harian, could I explain in more detail what aspect is? Yeah, okay, so aspects, the difference between aspects and tense is that tense indicates what time an action was completed, relative to when I'm speaking. So if I say I will walk, that indicates that after the moment I talk is when the walking is going to happen. Versus I walked indicates that the walking happened before the time that I'm speaking. Aspect refers to whether or not the action is ongoing or continuous or it's completed. So yes, thank you. So perfective versus imperfective are some affixes, are some tenses, are some aspects that occur in other languages besides English. We think about English, we can think of like perfect. So like I have walked indicates that the action is complete, and the have is in the present tense. So it has both present tense and past perfect aspect. If I say I had walked, that means the completedness of walked is in the past, if that makes sense, right? So completed, I have walked, I had walked, they're both completed. Changing have is in the present means that it's completed now. Had is completed in the past. So that's more to do with like the completedness of the action or whether it's ongoing versus relative to when I'm talking is tense. So a little, even for me, sometimes I have a little trouble getting the concept of aspect. All right, word order. So we've talked about different categories of words. These are some main categories of words. We may find there are other categories of words that we're not going to cover right here. But these are some very basic ones that most languages do have. All right. Any questions? Any other questions about parts of speech? We've now reached 8 p.m. over here. We're going to talk about now another aspect of syntax, which is word order. So we've talked about what's the very basics that we need to talk about combination, which is what kinds of words do we have. We can have nouns, we can have verbs, we can have adjectives, so on and so forth. We also want to talk about how these categories combine. So one very basic way that languages differ from each other is in the word order for a sentence. So for here, we can think about a subject, a verb, and an object, where a verb is a subject is something or somebody that is directly responsible for a verb, and an object is something that's directly affected by a verb, and a verb is the action, as we've talked about. So some languages like English have a subject that comes before an object. So like I'm saying right now, the dog sees the cat, the dog is the subject, it's doing the seeing, the cat is the object, it's being seen, it's being affected by the verb. That's the most natural way to say a verb, a sentence with a subject, a verb, and an object in English. We have subject, verb, object. Other languages have other ways of doing this most naturally. So some languages, like again, Bangla, which I speak, has a subject, an object, and then a verb. So in Bangla, I would say the cat, the dog sees. That means the cat is the one who's seeing the dog. There's many different word orders that we can have in word languages. Some have even, thanks Tara, some languages have the verb that comes first. This is something that we see typically is more common in indigenous languages of the Americas, like Zapotec, for example, has verb, subject, object. And there's some languages that are even, there are some word orders that are even beyond these combinations that we have here. So some languages are both going to differ in what kinds of how we combine a subject, verb, and object. They're also going to differ in how strict the word order is, right? So in English, the best way to say the most natural way to say a sentence, let's say the dog sees the cat, is subject, verb, object. If I really want to put emphasis on, let's say, the dog, I can put the object in front, right? So I can say the dog the cat sees, and that can mean something like it's the dog that the cat sees and not something else. Like the dog the cat sees, the map the cat does not, right? But that's it has a very special meaning. And it's not super natural. So English is a more restricted language on how word order can show up. But other languages can mix around words more freely. Any questions on word order as we've talked about so far? Sorry, I'm scrolling kind of fast. All right, so now let's talk about different types of sentences. So some very basic terms for classifying. Now that we've talked a little bit about how languages can combine words, we're also going to talk into sentences. We're also going to talk about different types of sentences. So declarative sentences are talking about the state, or when someone uses a declarative sentence, they're saying something about the world as it is, right? So, or something that they believe, right? So that child is sleeping. When somebody says that sentence, they're saying, this is what I believe the world to be. If I say that child broke the bowl, I'm saying that I believe, or I'm telling you that the child broke the rule, and that's the state of the world as I believe it to be. Existential is kind of a subcategory of declarative, where we can think about, again, the state of the world. When I say there's a child, that means that I believe that there's a child. I'm telling you there's a child, but I'm talking about the existence of the child, right? So rather than what the child does, which is kind of what we see in more declarative sentences, I can just talk about there is a child in the world. There is a noun in the world. This is a type of declarative sentence, but something just to keep in mind. Yes or no questions. So we have questions are basically types of sentences that we use to ask information from someone we're talking to. So I said a yes or no question in English is a question that can be answered in yes or no. So there's either it happened or either it's true or it's false. And the speaker wants to know. So if I say, did that child break the bowl? I'm asking, did the child break the bowl or did the child not break the bowl? There's two ways. There's two answers to this, and I don't know the answer, and I'm asking you for the answer. There's different ways that languages form yes or no questions. In English, we can say, let's say, the child broke the bowl. If I want to change that into a question, I have to add a did at the beginning of the word. I change the tense of the verb. It becomes, did that child break the bowl? Other languages do this differently. So in some languages, you could add a particle at the end of the word, or you can change the intonation, and that would make something a yes or no question. So the child broke the bowl. some languages, you can add like a word at the end to make it a question. You can add a word in the middle to make it a question. You can change the intonation. In English, we add a did at the beginning of the word, at the sentence, and we also use a special intonation. For WH questions, these are questions that we can think about that don't and that cannot be answered with yes or no, right? So they have to be answered with something more contentful than a yes or no question, than a yes or no. So if I say, did that child break the bowl? I can say yes or no to that, and I'll answer the question. It'll tell the speaker, tell me what, if I say, did the child break the bowl, and someone says yes, I have an answer to my question. If I say, who broke the bowl, I can't say yes or no and have that answer the question. So there's, somebody has to answer with a noun that broke the bowl. So WH questions, we can identify them in English as word questions with a word that has WH with them. Other languages are not going to have this WH, so we can think about it more simply as yes or no questions can be answered by yes or no. WH questions cannot. Any questions about these different types of sentences? All right. Let's see, what else do we have here? All right, so just really quickly, we're going to talk about different types of phrases. So in addition to combining words into sentences, each sentences can be made up of phrases. So a phrase, we can think about it as a combination of words. So prepositional phrases are groups of words that have a preposition in them. So prepositions, as we talked about earlier, always combine with nouns and sometimes articles. So we say on the desk below the ground, the preposition is occurring in combination with the noun. This whole combination is a prepositional phrase. Noun phrases, bright red backpack. This is all one noun. This is all one type of backpack or one description of a backpack. The old automobile is talking about one automobile, but it has more than one word than the noun. So it has a determiner and it has a adjective. Possessive noun phrases have possession, right? So Jackie's wild horses have information about who owns the noun, right? So these are all different ways that there's some very basic ways that, or not very basic, but these are some example ways that words can be combined into combinations, and these combinations will be called phrases. So different languages can combine words differently. For example, in a noun phrase, some languages are going to put the adjective after the noun. Some languages are going to put the determiner after the noun. And some are going to put them before. So languages can all group words into phrases, but how they do that and which phrases they can do are going to be different from language to language. All right, the last aspect of syntax that we're going to be talking about is glossing. So glossing is a transcription of the language's morphology and syntax. So languages can all break their, we've talked about how to break up languages, break up speech into morphemes. So we can break up words into morphemes, and we can describe combinations of the words into phrases and sentences. So how do we represent this when we're writing, right? Because when we write a normal sentence in how language is usually written, or if it's written at all, is that we're going to write it like one line. But that's not going to necessarily tell us any information about the morphemes. It's not going to tell us any information about the syntax. So in linguistics, there's a way to describe a morpheme and syntax of a language through what's called glossing. So a gloss is going to or sometimes called an interlinear gloss, is going to have at least 3 lines to describe the language. So the first line is going to be the text as it's spoken. Typically, that's going to be a transcription of the language in either the International Phonetic Alphabet, or so that the sounds of the language as they're able to be described and recognized by anybody, not just those who are literate in the language. Or there might be a transcription system, typically in the Roman alphabet, doesn't have to be in the Roman alphabet. Anything that tells us, that enables us to uniquely identify what the word is. So it may be different from the normal writing system from the language. It may be the same, depends on who's writing it. But that's what's going to be in the original, and those are going to be broken up into different words. So here for this Tagalog example, we have 4 different words in our gloss. And that's the original line. Our next line is going to be the morphemes. So here we have eat, which has a perfective infix, and that's indicated in the first gloss. And these are all lined up together, right? So I can see that eat is lined up with this word that means eat, with the perfective suffix in Tagalog. Here we have a case marker or another morpheme that has its original on top, and the second line is the bottom. The second line is a transcription of what the morpheme means. Here, this means that this co-morpheme means that it is that there is a first person singular subject, basically. So there's a little, as you read glosses, you're gonna have to become familiar with the different terminology that there are. But we can see as we go through the different words that they're broken up into morphemes and that each word is aligned with what it means. So here, this first word means eat, the second word means ergative, this third word means absolutive, and the last word means fish. Again, we don't have to necessarily go into what each word means right now, but we can see that the meaning of each word is given directly below the word. So that's what makes it an interlinear gloss. The first line is called original. The second line is the gloss, or the description of the morphemes. The last line we have is the translation. So if we're glossing this to an English audience, English-speaking audience, this translation is going to be the English translation. If we're reading literature in another language, it may be another language, but it will be the translation in natural language, right? Because we can't in English read this string of glosses aloud. To help the reader make sense of what the meaning of the sentence, we have a gloss at the bottom. So there's a set of rules called the Leipzig rules that are used to describe, help linguists or help anybody write and understand glosses across different languages. And that link is given here. And I believe the worksheet will be shared with everybody after this class. Any questions about glossing really quickly? Here's another example of glossing, right? So if I break up this English sentence where I say the dogs are barking at my friend, I can see the is a determiner, dog is we can throw this into the dog and the plural suffix, and we see that in the gloss where we have dog and plural. R is be with a third person plural conjugation, barking at my friend, right? So in the first line we have the original language. So in this case, we're glossing English. In the second line, we have the description of each of the morphemes in the original text. Some more tips about glossing: align each morpheme with its gloss, right? So here we have each morpheme is directly below its gloss, or its that indicates what it means. If we can easily separate 2 morphemes, then use a hyphen. So I have a base and a suffix here. I'm going to separate my suffix from my base using a hyphen. Same thing in barked. I have bark as my base, ed as my suffix. It's easily separable. And if there's not grammatical content that's easily separated, use a period. So mice from mouse, as we talked about, that's alternation. I can put dot plural to indicate that I can't show that there's a prefix or suffix that's plural. But we know that has a plural meaning, so I'm going to add a dot. So these are different conventions we can go over, and there's more conventions again in the Leipzig rules that will be given on the handout. All right, so here are some activities for us to maybe think about, maybe either doing now or doing after this is over, to start thinking about morphology and syntax in your language. Identify different affixes. And maybe see if there's other ways to form words so identify bases and what morphemes can slightly change the meaning, and also see if there's other ways to form words that are beyond just adding affixes. So we talked about compounding, reduplication, alternation. There's more processes beyond these, and I'm happy to answer questions about those. And also think about syntactic structures in your language. So in simpler terms, syntactic structures, how we can think about those as combinations of words. So how are words combined in your language that you're looking at, and how can we describe that? So is it, do adjectives go after or before nouns? Do subjects go before or after verbs? As an active in-person workshops. All right, yes. So we don't have like a website that we're working on right now. So just think about how you can do this on your own time. And if you have any questions about things you're coming up, don't have to be doing it right now. But maybe you can research different morphological terms, different syntactic terms if you're not familiar with them, or reach out to linguists or other people with more linguistic knowledge, technical linguistic knowledge. So that is so again, you can use this handout and use the slides as a base to think about. But again, there's for languages that are different than English, there's going to be different syntax and morphology from what we're talking about. So that brings us again to a very short introduction to syntax, combinations of words, how do we combine words, how do we combine categories of words and what categories are. And again, at the beginning of this session, we also talked about morphology. So how to create those words in the first place. So through affixes, bases, and other different processes. So I hope I've enjoyed talking about this with everybody. And I hope that everyone has been able to take something away. I believe this session has been recorded and will be shared on Facebook. There's a Facebook group that Anna has posted. If you have any questions right now that you want to ask or any comments, feel free to share them in the chat. I believe the ELP contact information is available online. If you have any, if you want to reach out to me specifically, I'm not sure that I'm the best. I may be the best to answer your questions, but I'm happy to also be in contact. So that's my email address, and I believe my Twitter is that here. So these I both use for professional purposes. So again, thanks to everybody for your great questions, great input, and feedback or sharing about your languages. I've really enjoyed learning from everyone here, and I hope you've been able to take something away from this as well.
Thank you, Samir. Beautifully done. And yeah, thanks everybody for being here tonight. Let's get a round of applause for the presenter. Great work. Next week, we are really excited to be learning about documenting traditional knowledge, including biocultural knowledge from longtime presenter Ha'a Solomon. So tune in, same time, same place. Thanks for being here, everybody. And wishing you a great weekend and night or day wherever you are. Thanks again, Samir.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, take care, folks.
Oh, I see Izzy in Southern California. All right, Izzy, I'm actually in Southern California myself. So do feel free to reach out to me if you have any question about indigenous languages in Southern California. I might not be, depending on what it is, I can either answer your questions, work with you, or direct you to people or resources who know more. So again, this goes for everybody. Feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to reach out to ELP folks. We will at some point be having more hands-on revitalization coaches to, like, if you have a revitalization project you're working on and you want outside input on, but other than that, we are also contactable. All right.
Yeah, reach out anytime. Take care, everyone. Bye. Have a good one.
Bye.